Welcome to the CODESHO podcast, everybody. My name's Cole, and this is my co-host, Matt, here. This is obviously our first podcast episode, and in this one we're going to be talking about getting started, and that means both with our podcast and with your programming career. So to kick things off, Matt, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Okay, so my name is Matt Casanova. I'm 37, which is important for a lot of the history that I'm going to go over. So when I was young, I didn't really know. Actually, I guess I kind of knew a little bit about computers. I was a little bit lucky because my dad was into computers, and we always had a few extra pieces like laying around. So I always had an extra computer. In the early 90s, I was making web pages using GeoCities. Actually, I had I forgot what we called it, like a guild or a clan for Diablo 1. And it was like Underground Battle Net Killers or something. We'd collect years or whatever. So I made like a GeoCities site. But like it wasn't really programming. I remember using Windows 3.1 and like playing around DOS, like doing like CD ... or whatever. And I was like, oh, I'm hacking. So this is really cool. So that was before I ever started any programming. In my 20s, I kind of quit school. Like I went to a 2-year I got my 2 years associate's degree, and I really just didn't like school. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but it certainly wasn't school. I was working a lot of, I worked construction jobs, so I installed like mirrors and shower doors. I worked at warehouses like late night. I worked at Godfather's Pizza for 7 years, and then part of that time, for like a year and a half, I worked the night shift at a warehouse. So we would like fill orders. It was kind of like UPS, but specifically for a company. Well, I'm just gonna be a rock star. Here's how nerdy I am. This is actually funny now because because I am a programmer. I would buy books like how to start a band for dummies, like how to play bass for dummies, like how to do audio recording, and I would read those books. Obviously it didn't help because I don't really play anymore, but so I was just trying to be in a band, but we were not that great. I didn't like my jobs. I had a buddy who did like his job. He had went to school doing computer programming, and he was working at video game companies. A video game company. He was working at Snowblind Studios, and he was making a lot of money, really liked his job. And I always say this. I hated my job and wasn't making money, and he liked his job and was making a good amount of money. And so I was like, well, this seems like a really easy choice because I had no future.
And you were how old at this point?
20... from like 22 to 26 is like this time that I was talking about where my
band phase.
What's that?
The band phase.
The band, yeah. Oh well, I was in a band since high school. I mean, like me and my buddies. I got my bass when I was 18, and I don't even think I played it for like the first 2 years. But we would like noodle around, and around 21 we had started playing some shows. And so, like 21 through 24 or 26, we were like playing shows. And when we weren't popular, but we were like, it was enough that we could get some shows. Like the other popular bands maybe had heard of us.
Okay.
But like in general, I don't know if it was because I just wasn't very good. Actually, I still have a lot of friends who have gone on to like keep making music. So like maybe it was just a me thing, and that's fine. But I was tired of being hungry, and it wasn't like a future. So I had a friend who went to DigiPen. It's like a video game school in the Seattle area. And so that's basically what I did. The first year I kept trying to do the band as well. And I think our last show was like the end of my first semester. We played over Christmas break. We played like a pretty cool New Year's show at our big band house, and it was like, it was an awesome show, right? And we had it's our rented out apartment, but we had like a ton of people in there. But after that, it was hard to study and keep trying to do band stuff. So so I went to I went to DigiPen. That is a 4-year school. It's very expensive. It's gotten doubled in price or more since I graduated. So we'll talk about that a lot because that's one way to start is getting your 4-year degree. So I thought I was gonna be making video games in Seattle. I worked hard and like I learned a whole bunch about like game architecture, but I got hired by DigiPen. So right out of school, this is again maybe some luck, some networking that I had made. Right out of school, I got hired by DigiPen to go to Singapore. They were opening up a new campus. Actually, the campus had already been open, but they were doing some continuing education stuff. And so it was like just a 3-month or 6-month course. So I taught over in Singapore for like 2 years. Still a lot of grinding because I was teaching from like 9 in the morning until 10 at night because I would teach like these, whatever. It was like one big course from like 9 until 4. There's a little bit of break. And then I would teach like these little modules like C++ module or like iPhone module, right? And even though at the time I didn't know anything about iOS, so.
And to be clear, you're like fresh out of college, right?
Fresh out of college, yeah.
This is your first job.
Actually, they hired me before I technically graduated. My last semester was going to consist of, it was only like 3 classes, and it was like art, English, and something else. And so because I had met all my CS prereqs, they were just like, and like I said, it was because I had interned with them as well. I didn't mention that. So I had been making some network with some of the people at the school. And but yeah, they hired me fresh out of college. Also, it was hard for them to find people. This is my opinion. It was hard for them to find people who wanted to go to Singapore. I didn't know anything about Singapore at the time. They speak English. It's like Mandarin and English are both like their primary languages. But when I first told people about moving to Singapore, some people were like, "Oh, what language do they speak? Like, do they only speak Chinese?" And so I think that turned off a lot of people, a lot of the other like students from going there.
That could potentially be employees or just students from learning there in general.
The employees, again, this is my opinion. I'm not trying to disparage them, but I'm sure that they were also looking for cheaper employees to hire. So I was hired as like a junior, like the equivalent of a junior dev. Even though DigiPen's a good school, still you're gonna get hired probably at any game company as a junior dev. So the school was looking for that equivalent, and that's why I was teaching continuing education stuff. It was like it wasn't the full 4-year degree program. This was for people who already had a bachelor's in computer science but wanted to know more about games. And so and it was like an all day. It was different than normal school. It was an all day course. Like I said, from like 9 until 4, I was teaching, and it was like, depending on how we like the first couple of weeks were front loaded with a lot of lectures, and then the end was more like labs where they would just program a lot. And so, but during that time, I also learned a lot because I have to be the one answering the questions about, and I was like nerdy because in school I read a bunch of books. I was also the student who bought all of the books for the class, like the prereq books, and I would read all of those books. I guess that was always kind of my attitude was I'm not necessarily the smartest, but I can read more books. And eventually, like, it's not like I'm going to become the best programmer because of that, but I assumed that if I gained enough knowledge, eventually it will, like, it's just not going to hurt. That's it. Like, that will make up for the fact that I'm not like a genius or anything.
Sure.
So I just, like I said, I read a lot of books. So I spent 2 years in Singapore. And then they did end up transferring me over to the Korean campus. Also, still DigiPen. It was like kind of like a sister school with a Korean college. And I was helping teach the first 2 years of our 4-year degree. And so, but it was like, it was still games, but the courses that I was teaching was a lot of just like hardcore computer science. So it was like intro to C, intro to C++, data structures and algorithms, like introduction to computer architecture and like operating system concept, that's the book, just operating systems, right? And so it was I loved it for a long time because it was basically my job to read about programming. I programmed all day, but like read about programming, do the fun stuff, and then tell people who were also interested about it. So like it was a lot of fun. I did that for like 5 years. After the 7 years, so the 2 in Singapore and then the 5 in Korea, it just didn't feel like a challenge anymore. My students were actually doing some really cool stuff. And it felt like I would have students making some awesome graphics engines, or like, man, I had this one student who made just like a killer physics engine, sophomore in college. And I was just thinking like, I'd like to dedicate more time to doing that. I like the building part a little bit more than the teaching part at this point. So that's when I decided like maybe it's time for me to leave teaching and get a job building the actual stuff.
Well, real quick, before you move on to your part about coming back to the States, I'm just kind of curious. So you kind of went straight out of school, went into programming as a teacher, and you're teaching kids game development. And I'm just curious, like, how does your relationship with them work? Like, obviously they're going on to work in jobs, and you've never had a job at this point making games professionally.
Yeah.
So how does that, like, was there any struggles that you had with that? Did the students have questions?
Actually, yeah. So it was good. So like, I wasn't directly teaching the games, which is potentially like beneficial. So I was teaching, because I was teaching the language. Here's the language of C and C++. So that definitely helped, because actually, like what I was saying is, when I was first in Singapore, I was actually teaching some students that were much older than me. Students who had, like I said, they had already graduated, sometimes like in their 30s or 40s, and they would challenge me. And I was perfectly okay with that. You should challenge your teacher,
Sure.
like to a certain extent. But like, if you don't feel that they're qualified, challenge, right? Luckily, though, like,
Well, do you think that's what it was? Were they challenging you because they thought you weren't apt to teach the course, or were they challenging you just for fun?
I actually, that's a good question. I don't know what their motivation was, but maybe as the young teacher, I thought it was the first one, that they were challenging me because they didn't think I was qualified. Again,
Okay.
which is perfectly fine, right? But they would do it, and they would ask me a question. We're talking about really basic stuff, and they would ask me like what they thought would be like a hard question, and I'd be like, "Okay, class, this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but here's what you do." And I could, and they would usually be quiet pretty quick, because actually, and this we're gonna hit on this a whole bunch, but no matter how old you are, if you know what you're doing, that's really all that matters.
Sure.
So like they learned, like, and I never, even as a teacher, I never said I was an expert. I said like I like this stuff. I'm a little bit further along than you. If you have questions, we can figure it out together, which I think is a good attitude for a teacher to have. I did study hard. I did read a lot of books, and I did program like nonstop. But like I said, it's good. If you think that your teacher isn't qualified, it's reasonable to ask those questions. So
Sure.
it was just, and actually I did get questions where I wouldn't know the answer. But as if you've been working with the language long enough, you know how to find the answer. And so I would also honestly say, "Oh, that's a good question. I never tried that. Let's dig in." Because it was like that 10-hour class or whatever. I would say, "Let's dig in. Let's do some live coding. Let's figure out this behavior, and then we can, like, now we both learned, and we kind of know the underlying like behavior of C or C++."
Right.
So yeah, it was like I said, I got to learn a lot as well. And yeah. Okay. So but then, like I said, eventually it wasn't challenging because I wanted to build stuff. That's basically it. Like, the teaching was fun, but I wanted to build stuff. So I moved back to America. I got married in Korea, but I moved back to America with no job. And I was able to get a job. It was actually my first interview, which was also very lucky. So I had one interview, I got one job. The reason they hired me was because I had made some iOS and Android games. I guess that was my professional experience. I had made one game for a company as like an intern, and then some side games like for myself, kind of like just for fun. And so they saw that I knew mobile development, but as you know, because you've now tried playing with some games, app development is different than game development. So I had actually never done anything related to web. I hadn't touched HTML in over 10 years. I didn't know. I had never done JavaScript. I think when I was like back in GeoCities, I don't even think CSS or JavaScript was a thing. Like, I'm not positive. I just didn't learn about that when I was playing around with it. So
Sure.
So they hired me to do Android development, and I was like, yeah, I can learn. And like they had a pre-existing app, so there was some code to jump in on, and so it wasn't like I was starting from scratch. I also had bought some new like Android books, like Learn Android, get going. And after the first month of that job, the iOS guy quit, and like he quit with like no notice, like maybe 4 hours notice, because he came in and said, "Yeah, I just quit today, so you're going to be taking over iOS." And I
Encouraging
remember,
for a guy at a new job.
Yeah, but I remember, I don't remember if I smiled like out loud or whatever, like physically, like if he saw it, but my heart was smiling because I was up for the challenge, because I knew like, oh, this is gonna be great. I knew it was gonna be a lot of hours, but I knew it was gonna be great. And so actually, like during that job, I was trying to start my own YouTube channel, and it was just, if you ever want to be bored, go and watch my first like YouTube videos. It's just like I think I call them daily grind, where I wake up at 4:30, I go to the gym, I go to my job by 6 o'clock because I could walk there, and I would do that on the weekends too. And I would go in on the weekends, and I was helping build the iOS and Android app. And then once we released those, we also did some Ionic, which is like the hybrid platform. So I was like redoing some of their partners, like their partner sites. We ended up doing them in Ionic. So I was happy to learn a whole bunch. After a year and a half, I did a review. So, what I didn't say was I took a big pay cut to get that job, right? Like I wasn't making decent money as a teacher, which is another reason why I thought like programmers can go make more money. So I had kind of high hopes of like, oh, I've been teaching for 7 years, so I should get like a senior dev job, no problem. Actually, the job they were hiring for was senior dev. I told you that before. They hired me as a junior dev. They didn't really care about that teaching experience at all. And so after a year and a half, I finally did like a review, and they didn't give me the raise I was hoping for. Because like I said, I was like in my opinion, I was being underpaid, especially because I took over both apps and like did a whole bunch of other stuff. And they wanted me to kind of, I felt it was like moving backwards. They didn't think there was enough money in the apps, and they wanted me to start working on their old like Visual Basic projects. And so I didn't have any ego about that. The thing that I did, I mean, I wasn't happy with it, but I thought, okay, I now have a year and a half of experience. I wonder what the job market is like now. I wonder how valuable I am now. Am I only like X number of dollars valuable? Because like I'm not just gonna storm into my boss's office and just say I quit. Maybe I'm actually still not valuable. So I went to another one job interview. I got a job. So that was nice. I also got hired as a Android developer at this second job. So I put in 3 weeks notice at that first job. I gave them plenty of time. I wrapped up all my projects. And then I started as an Android developer at my second job in Vegas. And what I found out on my first day, actually in that interview, like there was the iOS dev he had been kind of like doing both iOS and Android, and he was looking for some help. So in this interview, like he was there. On my first day of work, he was not there. And then on my second day of work, he was not there, and nobody was telling me anything. And then on my third day of work, like I started like seeing some like patterns. So for example, I plugged in my mouse and it said like this guy's name, this guy's mouse. And I was like, what's up? So as it turns out, that guy quit on the Friday before I started. So I was also in charge there at for both iOS and Android. Unfortunately, the way their code base worked, I tried to learn a lot there. It was like maybe not the greatest code, but the way because of some regulations, they couldn't really change the code that much. And they're actually just, I don't know if it was like weird management or like they were going through transition with their parent company. And so I just didn't actually do that much directly on the iOS or Android. So I learned a whole bunch about like doing like a test server. I think I had told you about that before. So like I had been playing with like the continuous integration, continuous delivery, writing more bash scripts, which is part of what I taught when I was in school or when I was teaching. So like the side stuff I was doing, I was learning a lot, but they're just actually all through my last, like I only worked there for like 6 months, but like 2 or 3 of the months there was like no work to be done. And so I just said, okay, well, I'm not really doing anything of value here. So I went and I looked for a new job. That's now the current job that I have, working with you. That has had its ups and downs, but it was nice because it was a brand new app. So I got lots of control over the code, lots of control over the architecture. I got to kind of plan things out how I wanted to do it. It's like a startup feel for a company. So just things are moving fast, but we've had, because you're going to talk about yours as well, we've had the chance to touch everything, like every like important library. Like, so we're obviously doing like API calls, but like we're doing like Google Play or Google Pay or like Apple Pay, like in-app purchases or credit card purchases. I don't know, like the list goes on. It's a whole bunch of stuff that I never touched before because the apps themselves that I did were pretty basic. So it's been a lot of fun. So lots learning on Android, learning other tools since the back end they use is Laravel. I get to play around with that a little bit. I play around with MySQL or MySQL. Maybe I'm not. I forget. There's arguments about how you call that. Anyway, it's been an exciting job. It's a great team. Our app combined has over 1 million users. Over 2 million users.
2 million, yeah.
Nice. Android alone has 500 plus thousand downloads, and it's high revenue. Like high number of users and high revenue. So I feel like I'm making a cool impact. But yeah, like it's obviously been a long trip. I think I've been programming now for almost 15 years. I think I started school in 2006, I believe. So programming wise, I've been programming like a long time, and there's been like some ups and downs, but I got started, and 15 plus years or 10 plus years later, like I'm thinking I'm in like a really, really good place.
Yeah. And you are now 37.
Oh yeah. And now I'm 37. So so you're going to tell your story, but that's the thing for anybody out there who's wondering, maybe I'm too old to start. Like, you can start. Actually, another thing I was thinking about, our tech boss, I don't know how old he is, in his late 40s or 50s. Maybe he'd be upset if I said that.
No,
I don't know.
30s, 40s.
Okay. Anyway, the point is, oh yeah.
He's gonna be like, what are you guys thinking? I'm 28. No,
I'm just kidding. I'm no good at guessing age. But the point is, they started a company. They started this company 4 years ago, and 4 years ago, maybe they didn't think it'd be where it is now, but it's growing. And so like they just started. And so so whatever. The point is, he's older than me when I started programming. Like, maybe he's not 50. I'm not good at guessing ages. Whatever. Get started. Whether you're 20 or 40, like, you can get started.
Or 16.
Yes.
Whatever it is.
So that's like a great transition because, why don't you tell us about you, Cole?
Yeah, so I don't know. So like we've been talking about doing this podcast for several weeks now, and I think both of us have thought about our introduction. How are we going to introduce ourselves? How do we talk about how we got into programming? And so especially in the last week, this has been on my mind a lot. And so I'm 23 years old, and I got into programming at a really young age, and I don't know why I got into programming specifically. I guess it just seemed like it fit me. Like, I guess at an early age, maybe like 12 or 13, I was working on a program called Scratch. I was making applications with a program called Scratch. And it's basically just like a visual programming language for making games and stuff. It's got conditions and loops and all sorts of stuff, but there's no actual writing of code. But it was appropriate for a 12 or 13-year-old, and I dug it. It was pretty cool. So that may have had some influence on why I ended up picking programming. But more specifically, the thing that got me to just get started and start working on my professional career was when I was 16 or 15, maybe even. I got my first job. I worked at a nursery, like a plant nursery, and I just hated it. I mean, it was so bad. It was really bad. Minimum wage or less, whatever it was. And my boss was a jerk. And long story short, I got fired from that after like 2 or 3 months. And it was, this may be my ego speaking, but it was partially my decision and partially my boss's decision. We had a disagreement. I got injured on the job, and
didn't you get like stabbed by a plant or something?
Yeah. I had to carry a plant box, like a big old heavy tree box, and I told my boss that I wanted to use the forklift, and he told me I wasn't old enough, and he was right. I wasn't old enough, but when he wasn't there, I used forklift all the time. So, anyways, so he told me, no, you're going to carry this thing with your hands, and long story short, it was a very heavy box. A nail was poking out the side. It cut me open. I was gushing blood. And he basically told me, like, you need to still get this box to her truck. Like, I don't have time to give you bandages. I don't have time. So, whatever. I was like, I hate you. Like, I did end up getting the plant to the lady's truck.
Get the job done. Doesn't matter.
I got the job done, but I was like, I told my boss, I'm like, I'm not coming in tomorrow. Like, I'm hurting, like, whatever. And he's like, you're going to be here or you're going to get fired. And I was like, okay, cool. I guess I'm getting fired. And I'm a dumb 15, 16-year-old. This has no point to any of this. I left that job 3 months later. The really significant part, though, is my next job. I got my next job at McDonald's, and it's funny that now I have the opportunity to talk about this because I've thought about this for a while. And basically, like, I worked there for like 2 years, and after like a year, I was like 17, and I was the youngest manager, I think, in all of Las Vegas to work for McDonald's. I had great work ethic, whatever, but like I just realized like this isn't for me. Like I'm not digging this. I'm not making enough money, and so I would come home and complain about it. I'm obviously still living with my parents, and like as you know, and other people that know me know, like my dad was in the Marine Corps. He was very hard on me, and a lot of people seem to think, and they tell me like, you could probably attribute like all of your success to having really good parents and having parents that pushed you, and your dad being in the Marine Corps and all that. And maybe that's partially true, but I think there's something even more significant than that. I did have good parents. I'm not at all going to say like I was deprived of good parenthood. I had very good parents. But I think the thing that made me so successful is this. Worked at McDonald's, was there for a year and a half, or like 2 years or so. I got promoted to manager, and I came home. I'm making like maybe $9 or $10 an hour now.
All right, big money.
Big money, right? Like I'm excited, even though I know I don't want to be here. I don't want to be at McDonald's. I want to do something better, but I'm excited. I'm excited to come home and like tell my dad, like, look, I got this job, whatever. And don't get me wrong, like, he was proud of me, but like you could tell that his reaction was more that of like, okay, like congrats, son, you got a long way to go. This is a nice little milestone, though. And for me, I was like, dang, like I was really expecting my dad to be like, congrats, like that's awesome. But like in hindsight, I'm really glad he didn't. And throughout my life, my dad always did this, and it just drove me crazy. Like every time that I wanted to do anything, my dad's response to me was always like, well, you're just too young. Like that's just your phase in life right now. And I would just get irritated. I'd sit there and be like, no, I'm not going to take that for an answer. Like I'm not going to have somebody tell me like it's just your age. And so I just got really, really frustrated. And so I was like, you know what? I'm 17. I'm in my senior year of high school. Like, let me just fall back on something that I know I'm good at, which is programming. And I just dug deep. Like, my parents will be the first to tell you, like, when all my friends were partying and stuff, I wanted to prove my dad wrong. I didn't want to have to wait for the success. So I was like, I'm just going to dive in deep right now and just learn. So for hours every day, I had 2 or 3 monitors in my room. I'm watching a lesson on this video and like programming over here. And that just always stuck with me. And so to get back to my timeline a little bit, after McDonald's, I just decided like, okay, I have to look for a new job. Like I have to prove to myself that this is not all that I'm good for. So I ended up getting a job working for Hewlett Packard. That didn't last very long. I was just like a salesperson.
I think Steve Jobs had that same.
He did work for HP, didn't he?
That was his first job.
Yeah.
Something like that.
So I worked for them for a little while, and I had a couple jobs in between that were unimportant, call centers and stuff like that. And then the next milestone in my life was I landed a job at an app company, and my job was data entry. But I knew that they made apps that at least excited me because it was programming and it was something that I was interested in, a field that I wanted to get into. So I dug really deep at that job. I put in lots of extra hours. I got really close with like my boss at the time, and she ended up promoting me to like a like a management position, like team lead. Like I started now managing all the data entry people, and because of that, I was able to communicate a little bit more directly with the app developers and the upper management and all that. So eventually I got to a point there where I was like, okay, I feel confident enough as a developer, and I know that like I know enough to write some code. So I went to the owner of the company and I was like, look, like I'm either going to be leaving here to go pursue a job in programming, or you can give me a job doing this. If you don't want to, like, no trouble. I understand, like, I'm not going to be upset with you, but like this is just really, this is what I want to do. So he gave me a chance, and man, I wasn't ready. Like I was not ready at all. Like
what were you like? You said apps, so were you building like iOS apps or like
no? So at
websites?
that job, it was websites. The first task that I wanted to work on the app, but that wasn't what they put me in at first. The first thing they wanted me to do was work on like an admin panel that was built in like Vue and just a website or whatever. And they wanted me to do that, I think, because they wanted me to prove my ability to write good code that was scalable and whatnot, but they didn't want to put me in like a user-facing application or whatever. Yeah. So this was just something that we saw internally, and it's not like I got any slack at all for that. Like all of the owners of the company, the stakeholders and whatnot,
they're using that.
They're using that, so I'm getting the full force of it and whatnot. But anyways, there was another guy there that helped me. He kind of like mentored me through that a little bit. He pushed me really hard, and I basically was like, I cannot fail. Like I don't know what I'm gonna do, because if I fail at this and I have to quit, I'm gonna end up going back to some data entry job or some whatever entry level job that I really don't want to do. So I have to succeed. Like this has to work. So I did. Like I was just watching tutorials every single day and like just going home and just getting no sleep, just trying to get it figured out. And I did, and like by the end of that job, I did get really good at it, and I ended up segueing into working on Android a little bit. Started building that out. That was sort of out of necessity because the Android guy quit. We had a guy that was like way overqualified, and he ended up leaving. And so then they put in the guy that's way underqualified, and eeks. But no, I mean that was fine. I did all right at that for a little while. I toyed with iOS a little bit at that job. And long story short, the guy that I worked for was a real dirtbag. Like, I hated this guy so much. He was so bad. And so I ended up kind of like telling him that I was done there. I wanted to move on. But I was willing to, while I was looking for new jobs and stuff, I was willing to kind of work part-time. I knew they were going to have a hard time filling that position and whatnot. So I was like, because I did like a lot of stuff, not to like toot my horn, but I did like the Android app and I worked on the iOS app and the Viewport. So I was like, they're gonna have a hard time filling all these positions or finding one person that can do all of them. So I'll work part time for you, just giving like an extended notice, and you can pay me part time in the meantime. And he agreed to that. So I did that, and I worked several jobs in between, and on several projects in between then and now at the job that we're at, doing freelancing and all sorts of stuff. But anyway, I mean, that's basically my story, and you've said where we're at now at our current company and kind of explained that, and they're just experiencing massive growth, and I think all of us that work there are feeling a lot more confident now, maybe even than we did when we got there, because we've all been exposed to so many different technologies, and I don't know, it's just like, it's really cool. This company in particular, I remember whenever I first got hired, one of the bosses told me, he said, we're going to try to kind of embody that Steve Jobs mindset of like, I didn't hire you to tell you what to do. I hired you for you to tell me what to do. Mm-hmm. And that was, I don't know, that was a really cool point in my career, because I feel like that's what we get to do, is we get to make a lot of decisions about, what we do and whatnot. Yeah. So anyways, I mean, that's kind of my story. So I guess in closing with that part, one thing that I did kind of want to mention is that I am not one to offer parenting advice. I'm not a parent myself, but I would say one thing that if maybe you are a parent and you've got a kid that you see as ambitious and you're trying to find a way to encourage that, not that my style of learning applies to everybody, but I think it's just a good principle, is like I feel like my dad especially, he held the carrot right in front of my face, but he just never let me grab it. And every time that I went for it and I was like, yes, I finally got this little milestone, he was just like, yeah, but no, there's still more to go. And I mean, he'll never let me live that, until I die. I'll be like, Dad, maybe I made $1 billion. And he's like, well, you could make $1 trillion. I don't know what to tell you. Like, so.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a parent either. That seems like, it seems like reasonable advice, because I would do the same. Actually, I would do the same when I was a teacher. Like, for students who did really well, like, I can't say that being a teacher is like being a parent. It's different, right? But like, you have, at the very least, you have more of them. So you have to pay attention to who are the kids I can push and who are the ones that I can't, right? So like, I had some, like I said, I had some really, really great students, and they would come and show me something that's like, oh, this is pretty cool. And I would say, hey, that's awesome. Can you make it do this?
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's pretty cool. Like, can you make it do this? Or like, they would ask, like, how can I do this? And I said, like, why don't you try it? Like, if you really get stuck, you can come ask me. But like, you try it first, and then let's see where you go.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, like maybe being a teacher is not like being a parent, but being a parent is being a teacher.
Yeah.
So like, there's
definitely.
Certainly, if you've ever been in a teaching role before, or you've been taught and something worked for you, that does apply to parenting in a lot of ways. So, anyways, I mean, that's how I kind of got to where I was. And
there's a couple of interesting, as you were telling me your story, there's a couple of interesting things that I think is related to why we wanted to start this podcast. One of them was, again, like, I like to compare and contrast our stories, because you did start young. I maybe could have started young because I was doing that programming stuff. Instead, I did party. Like, I always got good grades in school, so I wasn't like totally just out of it. Like, I studied hard in school. Whenever I had electives, I would take like extra math courses, like, oh, calculus 2 should be fun, or something like that. So, but like, actually, I got paid for grades. Like, my parents paid us for grades, and then as soon as I got a real job, I kind of stopped caring because I liked money. But yeah, like, one thing that stands out is, like you said, you weren't partying, whereas I was partying, right? Maybe not as much at like 16, 18 for me, but like in my 20s, especially because I thought I was going to be in a band. What do rock stars do? They better drink,
yeah.
you know? And so like, we were partying a lot, and like you got to where you were, and like, cause like both of our stories involve grinding and hard work, and like, spending like some late nights doing tutorials or reading books. That's kind of like the comparing parts. We just did it at different ages, actually, right? Like, mine was pushed off because I just wanted that money. So I was like, well, I'm gonna not go to school and get this warehouse job, right? And I was making money, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, like maybe there's like some of that delayed gratification I should have focused on. Also, yeah, like, the fact is, where we're at right now, I don't know what your official title is, but like, at least the unofficial title is your lead mobile. Like, your lead, because like you technically are only iOS, and maybe technically, like, I think my job title is Android developer. Your job title might be, at the very least, iOS developer. You touch on a whole bunch of stuff, but in the meetings, like, they're looking to you. You've been here longer, but like, they're looking at you, and it has nothing to do with, what do I want to say? They wouldn't be looking at me only because I'm older. And that's one of the things that I care about here. It doesn't matter that I'm 37. It matters that, like, you're damn good at your job, right? And
yeah, I mean, I guess that, like, whenever I first got hired there, like, we established that level of trust. It was like they didn't know me from Adam, and I came in, and they basically just started. I mean, they were hard on me at first. Like, it was like giving me all sorts of tasks, even things that I wouldn't admit then, but I'll admit now, like, just wasn't comfortable with certain I don't know, frameworks and languages and stuff they have me working with. And, oh, are you familiar with this? Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Maybe
I can do it. That's the thing I'll always say is, like, I don't know it. Maybe I even said that in the interview. It's like, Oh yeah, with Kotlin, right? Like when I was interviewed for this job, it was a brand new app. So I said like, I forget how it came up. Like, how good are you at Java? I said, yeah, I'm okay. Like, but like, and somehow Kotlin got brought up, and I said, well, I've never done it, but I'll do it.
Yeah.
Right? And now, like, our app is 100% Kotlin.
Yeah. Well, I've heard people say before, especially in this career, but this applies to really anything. It's like if somebody asks you if you can do something or if you're confident doing something and you tell them yes, but maybe internally you're thinking no a little bit, like, is there something wrong with that? And I think that, like, it really comes down to one thing. If you know that you can figure this thing out and you're confident that you know enough to not write sloppy code, you know enough to know which resources to tap into if you need some help, then like I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. It's kind of like I don't know, like the first iteration of the app that we worked on here was in React Native, and I had mentioned that we should probably do that. The timeline was really short, and it was only me at the time, and it was like we need to get this thing out quickly. So I was like, well, let's do it in like React Native, and they were like, okay, and you're good with doing that, like you feel comfortable doing that? Yeah, of course.
Yeah, sure.
And like really at the time, was I super comfortable with React Native? No, not really. But I had seen React. I was familiar with like SPA frameworks, even though.
And you knew JavaScript. You knew.
Yeah.
You knew Vue. Like, so
I knew app development.
Yeah. So like, it's not unreasonable. Versus like, when I first started this job, if they would have asked me to set up a new backend in Laravel, I would have said, what?
Yeah.
No way. And then now I still would be like, I shouldn't be leading this project. If you need me to do it because there's no other resources, I can do it. Then if they said, oh, can you do it in like Ruby on Rails? Maybe. Because like I'm guessing that a lot of these frameworks are similar. You've used both of those. So I'm guessing they're similar. But still, I would say like putting me in charge of this is going to be risky. But I can do it. If it needs to get done, I'll do it.
Yeah.
Like,
well, I mean, there's like I'm not going to go into the whole details of how this came up, but we've talked about this before, which is kind of like you need to know where you fall on this scale, but there's like 5 levels of your skill in a language. There's number 1, which is like I know nothing. I don't know anything about this. And 2 is like I'm learning this thing right now. I'm not comfortable at all, but I'm learning. Like I know a little bit about it. 3 is like I'm independent, I can work, but like whatever. 4 is I'm really comfortable with this topic, I know everything I need to know about it, you can even ask me questions. And 5 is like I'm a leader. And like, do those numbers matter? No, but it's like it's important to know where you fall on that scale, because then you can like, you know, interact with people differently based on that. So anything like you were talking about, like if they were to put you in charge of the backend back then, it's important to know when you should say no. Like if you know nothing about backend development, you don't know anything about the language or the framework, like it can be appropriate. But if you're confident, like I was with mobile development and JavaScript and whatnot, then I think it's fair to do that. So
yeah, because I had said the same thing when I was doing the Ionic apps.
Yeah,
like, I had some experience, and I was just like, well, I can figure it out, and I did. Like I was able to. So again, like it kind of connects. It doesn't really matter when you start. Like if you're interested, just like that's why we started this podcast. We've been talking about it for a while. It's better to just start.
Yeah.
You started programming. Again, like both of our stories had these like bumps along the way, but it was like it wasn't just, oh, Cole was a genius. At 23, he's lead mobile developer. Like that's the short version, but it's not. Yeah. It wasn't that. Like and like, oh, Matt taught for 7 years and wrote a book or something like that. Like whatever. Like there was a lot of hard work involved in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, I mean, we have lots of stories about like how do people start. One of my bandmates started out. This is actually while I was I in the band at this time, or maybe I had already started school. But he got a job because our other buddy had been making video games. He got a job at that guy's company as a QA, like tester. Like video game tester, which sounds like a dream job, but they would like play the same level, like jump on this platform like a million times and then spin around twice and then see if you can reproduce that bug. Like, and so he said it was just horrible, right? Actually, I had two buddies, 2 bandmates that did this. One guy quit that and is still in a band. hopefully things go well for him. Like he's not starving or anything, but like they're not super famous in Seattle. But the other guy who stuck with the QA built up his like credibility at that company. He started doing design work. And for the last couple of years, there's actually some YouTube videos of this guy, but like he's lead designer on, I don't know if it's been 2 game companies or 1 game company, but it's like been like the same, kind of like the same people. It's like the same owners, maybe. Yeah. But like, so like for the past couple of years now, he's been lead designer, like for video games. And that was his dream. And it started out with him in a cubicle all day, like testing games, like, and it just, you know, that's how you like start any way you can, I guess, but like start, that's the key.
Yeah. I mean, that's a common denominator with everybody, and like we even work with a guy now that I've also worked with previously, and he's the same situation. It was like he knew that this was kind of the industry he wanted to get into, and QA seems like a good. I didn't do QA. I don't think you did either, but like it seems like a really good entry point, like for somebody looking to just get started. Like, where do I go from here? Go like my thing was I worked for that. I did data entry, but I worked for an app company, and this guy was the same situation, but he did QA working for a company that made apps, and it's just like just do it, just get started and go work for a company that does what you want to do, and then like maybe you will, maybe you won't transition into the position that you want. In this case, the guy that we're talking about, he did QA, still does QA. He knows that he wants to get into programming, and this dude is not afraid to grind it out. He's
putting in extra hours. I see him every morning.
Yeah. He comes in really early and whatever, even does it at home. But now he's kind of at the point where it's interesting because like he did just do it. He did just get started and get that first job. But now he's at another point where he needs to just do it, where he's like talking about it, but he needs to just kind of like get into his programming position and just like make it clear that I hope that he's not going to hate me for sitting here and talking about what he should do. But anyways, but he's just at a position where it's like, okay, well, you know programming and you know that this is where you want to go, get after it, do it. Just do what you got to do. So anyways, I guess that's like the common denominator is it seems so simple, but like if you're interested in programming or if you're interested in flying planes, if you're interested in being a lawyer, like, you got to start somewhere. You got to start watching videos. Listen to other people. One thing that I don't think we planned on talking about, but I want to talk with you about it a little bit since we have some time, is just like the whole age thing. And to kind of kick off this little topic, I want to bring up one thing. So I had talked about how I was driven by mainly my ego, really, honestly. Like, I didn't like my dad telling me that like I needed to be older to do this thing, and I wanted the gratification now. And a lot of people think that that's a bad thing, like instant gratification and whatever. So maybe it is, but it worked out for me. So I guess like the dichotomy here is that like my ego got me where I'm at, and it was a necessary tool. And like when you're young, it's very present. Like your ego and your pride is very present, and it got me here. But like now, especially working with a lot of people like you that are even older than me and just trying to absorb as much as I can, it's like now I want to get rid of that. But it's kind of weird how that works, right? Like I'm curious where you, because like when we talk about you, I only know you over the past couple of years, and you're obviously older now, and you were talking about how when you were younger you got into this and you were in school. I just want to know how your kind of ego played a role in that, if it was a good thing, if it was a bad thing, kind of how it affected you when you were younger. And actually also, do you wish that you would have got started younger, or are you pretty happy with the way that things ended up turning out? Sorry, that was a lot that I just threw at you.
That's two questions. So let's look. Would I change things if I can? But that's the second question. Let's do the ego thing first.
Okay.
I agree. The ego is like a lot of people talk. There's actually a book called "Ego is the Enemy," and it talks about it's like by Ryan Holiday. It's a really good book. But like it can be people's downfall. So you do have to like. It has to be a balance, like because we've known coworkers like and at other companies as well, or we've even known like you've told me about some of your bosses, like where like your ego can be your downfall. So you want it to be. I try to use my ego, or I try to think of my ego as a driver for myself personally, right? Like,
that's a good way of looking at it, really.
I constantly think, I mean, like, I try to have a good assessment. Like, yeah, I think I'm a good programmer. Like, the stuff that I say, like, not the best in the world, but the stuff that the way that I've architected the Android app, you don't really see that stuff, or it's like minuscule. You don't see that stuff online. But I don't say that I'm like the best. I don't say that I'm the best in the world. I'm willing to listen to other people's architecture. I love hearing why mine could be better. That's basically it. And so that's I guess that's one of the things I'm always concerned with. Ego is good, but the thing that I really try to be concerned with is actually getting better. Yeah, because we didn't plan on talking about this, so I'm not sure how to say that. But yeah, like if you care, because it kind of goes into like learning how to learn. The most important thing is to get good, right? So the problem is ego actually gets in the way of that a little bit. Again, like it balances out. If it's driving you forward to get good, that's an awesome thing. If you think your way is the best and other people, like, there's some quote that says like the person who already knows everything can't learn anything.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like usually, obviously, nobody really knows anything, knows everything. So the problem is, but if you have that mindset for yourself that like, well, my way's already the best, so how could I possibly learn a better way? Actually, a perfect example. I mean, I didn't think that I was like a genius iOS developer, but when we were talking about table views versus collection views, and I just asked you, I was like, hey, how come you use the collection view on this thing here? Like, why not use a table view? And you said, well, let me turn that around on you. Why would you use a table view instead of a collection view? And I go, oh, like that's, I had no answer. And like, I mean, you're right. It really doesn't matter. And collection view might be more flexible. I don't remember your specific.
I think maybe we were talking about maybe table view or collection view versus stack view.
Oh yeah, no, that was it. Yeah, you're right. You're right. That's what it was. Yeah.
Which we can talk about later. We'll talk about that.
I mean, there's going to be a lot of deep dives into the tech stuff. Yeah, definitely. But yeah. So I think that's how I feel. Like the ego, for me, and again, I don't know when I learned this. Maybe it was because it's pretty easy to get humbled when you're in your 20s and like you've. Like, I mean, I worked at Godfather's for like 7 years, so like there's nothing to be like bragging about that.
Pizza, by the way.
Oh yeah, Godfather's Pizza. Yeah. I worked at these like different construction places and stuff like that, and like it just things weren't going anywhere. So like I liked what I was like. I liked my life. I was in a band. The band. I mean that was obviously like a lot of ego. Like I think our band is the greatest.
Yeah.
But it just like wasn't going anywhere. So after that kind of stuff, I think you get humbled a little bit. And so when I went to school, I even remember thinking, like, I don't care if I make the best game. I want to, like, while I'm in school, because there'd be, like, these design challenges. But while I was in school, it's like I want to figure out how to be the best programmer. What's the best architecture? That's just, again, that's maybe my personality. If people don't think this particular game is fun, for me, that's not important. Now, for a designer, maybe that's important, so that's fine. If this game isn't fun, it doesn't matter if I learned how to architect stuff better and make it more efficient and do whatever. So like, I guess again, like the ego was just maybe in a different spot, but I tried letting that drive me, just to get better though.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. And I didn't really have that light bulb moment maybe until now. It's like you can definitely use your ego to your advantage, but it has to be more of an internal thing. It's like if you sit here, maybe like I did, and say like, I know I'm a good developer. I know I've got a good brain for engineering. I know that I can do better than what I'm doing now. I know that I've got more to learn. That can be a weapon. But the moment you start to do like what you said and just say like, yeah, I'm not going to listen to this guy because I'm just a genius iOS developer, whatever. Or again, this goes to any profession. That's one thing I like about this is that with this platform, we can talk about these skills and stuff, but like they really don't just apply to programming. They apply to literally everything in life. So anyways, so that can kind of,
or just even like I said, when I didn't get the raise I was hoping for after, again, like another being humbled, like getting hired at that place and taking a big pay cut. Right now, that was only my first. It was only my first interview. That was actually only my first interview. But I also needed a job. Like I said, I came to Las Vegas because I had lived in Korea. It was hard to like interview for other jobs. So we had a place to live, but I went and I wanted a job ASAP. But after a year and a half I worked there, I was hoping that I would get a raise. They didn't give me a raise. And I kind of discussed what I had been working on, but I didn't get a raise. And again, I didn't let my ego get in the way. Like I said, I didn't just quit, even though I kind of wanted to. Like in that meeting, like, I kind of wanted to. But so instead I said, okay, let me see if I'm actually worth, like, can I find somebody who's willing to pay me more? And like, I think that's at least a good lesson for somebody. Like I had, obviously that's how I did it, but like, don't just, getting mad wouldn't have helped. Cause what if, that's the other thing, maybe, I mean, you're married now too. Being married and being like the only person making money, cause we had just moved to Las Vegas. If I quit my job, what if I can't get a new job?
Yeah.
So like there's some like being humble there too. So
well, for anybody that hasn't heard the quote, that's like the best time to get a job is when you already have one.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
That's definitely true. But
yeah.
Anyways, I didn't mean to derail what we were talking about.
No, I think that's I love that topic. And then your second question was,
right.
would I change it? That's a year or two ago, I might have said yes. I'm really impressed with like the fact that you did it at a young age. We work with that other guy you said he got hired at 18.
Yeah.
Yeah, 18. He's 19 now. I'm really impressed with that. My wife is also, she's like an amazing artist. She's so good. She started in middle school, basically. She went to an art high school in Korea, and her dream was to own her own academy, and she did. And she's just like really, really, really good. And she started young, and her dad wasn't a Marine, but like the way people from that town are, like the way Korean guys from that town are, she says, they kind of act like that. They're very like stoic, and it's like, yeah, live well, he'll say, or something like that. But yeah, so like I get really like, I definitely wish, man, if I would have made these choices when I was younger, that would have been better. Again, especially first moving to Las Vegas, not making money of course I'm a programmer, so we're making like better money than maybe like the construction, better than McDonald's, but I was hoping it would be more. And for the first 3 years, I was working like jobs that I knew I wasn't the right cultural fit. I was just grinding. But once I got this job, like I was making a comfortable, good amount of money. We're still grinding because we're working. There's a ton of stuff to do, but it's more fun and it feels like a cultural fit. And so now, now looking back, I go, no, I like the path that I was on. But when I was in the middle of it, when you're climbing up that hill, and obviously we're not at the top yet, nobody is, but like when it looks like you got so far to go and you're struggling to pay your like student loan bills and stuff, you're just like, ugh. I wish I would have started younger, or maybe I shouldn't have been a teacher, or maybe whatever. But yeah, it's now I'm very comfortable with it.
Yeah. Well, I guess to kind of like this kind of segues a little bit into the next thing that we wanted to talk about, which is, I think whether you would have changed anything or not, you had a really cool story, a really cool way that your life played out. And it's interesting to me because you were in school and you learned a lot, and college is like one way of learning in general, right? It's like there's it's
one of the paths.
The lectured approach, the read books approach, whatever, that's one way. And then you went straight into the opposite role of teaching people.
Being a teacher, yeah.
And then after that, and I guess, so at DigiPen, when you were working there and teaching students, you knew what you were teaching and you were comfortable with what you were teaching because you had just done it, and then you're doing that every year and whatnot. And then once you leave and come back and you get an actual job in we'll call it like the civilian, like non-educational workforce, you now are having to learn new skills like on the fly all the time.
Yeah, because I had never made like HTTP calls.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Like,
so at what point for you did that like light bulb moment hit where you're like, okay, now I'm having to learn things that I have not learned in the past. This is way outside of the wheelhouse that I've been in for the last 10 years or so. And now I've got to like figure out a way to pick this stuff up quick. Because even at our current job, like we are no stranger to some foreign thing that we've never worked with, and you just having to jump in, or any of us. So
that is, I always tell people this: the best thing I learned in college was I learned how to learn. And I guess it's a weird thing to say that, or I learned. When I say that, I don't have like a step-by-step instruction of how to learn, but like I learned how to learn for me, whatever that means. Because there's a bunch of stuff that I have, like, I feel constantly that I'm learning new stuff. And like for the past 3 years I was, but even before, like I remember like I said, they had me teaching, this was even in Singapore. They're like, okay, we need you to teach this. Like the person who was going to teach this iOS crash course has left. So you need to teach this. And, I go, okay. I guess I had briefly made a game, so I guess there was some knowledge there, but like I think we have talked about this a little bit before. Get comfortable not I forget how we said it, but like basically be comfortable like
not knowing.
Not knowing. Like if you're comfortable in that space that you just don't know, then maybe you won't panic as much. I think that's a big thing because I mean, I've met a lot of people who know iOS development, and then they say, yeah, but I don't like Swift. And I think the only reason they don't like Swift is because they have to learn something new.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to be at least the very least constantly learning, and like be comfortable not knowing.
Yeah, I don't know, like when I was early on in my career, it was like, which is it's probably laughable to a lot of people because I'm like that, 23. Yeah. So how am I? I'm still early on. But actually, that's really exciting, I guess, for me. That's kind of a weird thing to say, but it's like I've made an insane amount of growth in just the last 5 years, 6 years, but definitely in the last 4 or 5 years, really, I've just made an insane amount of explosive growth.
Every 5 years of my life, I feel that exact thing.
Yeah.
Like every 5 years, it's like, oh, that's so different than where I used to be.
Yeah.
So,
but for me, if I rewind to the beginning of this, anytime that I was put in a position where I had to do something that I didn't know, it was like overwhelming stress. Like I could feel everything sinking down, and like I had this constant fear of like, what if I lose my job? What if these other guys are judging me? What if whatever? And I mean, the funny part is like a lot of that was before I even wrote the first line of code. I was just terrified of not knowing this one thing. And I don't know, it's just very different now because I see something that I get to work on. It's almost that's how I look at it. Like I get to work on this new thing that I don't know. That is freaking exciting. Yeah. Like I'm stoked to learn this new thing. And I think that's because like now I know that I can. And I know that everybody possesses the ability to do the same thing. Everybody possesses the ability to learn this new thing. But you have to, I mean, it's like anything in life. You have to do something enough times to where you become comfortable and confident with it, and learning is no different. Like let's not forget that you can become good at learning. Most people are scared of learning, and that's because maybe they haven't learned that many things in their life. Maybe they've only learned one skill,
or they haven't been learning since they went to school, like high school or college. Or
yeah, that too. Yeah. And even if you did, I mean, maybe you went to go be I don't know, maybe you're a motorcycle mechanic or something, and if that's all you know how to do, and then somebody comes to you and says, hey, I've got this opportunity for you to be a diesel mechanic, you might be freaked out because the only time you've ever learned before is when you were doing like motorcycle or whatever. So programming is unique and really cool because we don't really have, well, we have that problem, but like we get to work on a lot of different things, and they are all, like, make no mistake, very foreign things to learn. Like back-end development and front-end development might as well be the difference between motorcycle mechanic and diesel mechanic. You know what I mean? Yeah. So but anyways, I've gotten to the point now where I'm just like crazy comfortable with that.
I think like you said, it is a skill. I don't have step-by-step, but I did also used to tell my students, I would say, you're like, picture your brain like a muscle. And I mean, this is probably really true, but like, and I would say, like, imagine what Arnold Schwarzenegger would do when he'd go to the gym. You think he's like cranking out those 10-pound curls? Like, no, he's I don't know what he curls. It's more than me, but like he's pushing himself. Like weightlifters push themselves like to that uncomfortable zone. And so when you're learning, you have to do that same thing. And like that uncomfortable, actually, I feel it a lot too. Like if I'm doing like whatever, that stuff I was working on for the game and I was doing that like that SIMD math, it's like it's pushing me. Like I have to go sit down in the morning and go work on this piece. But like I can feel my brain like hesitant. And it's like, because it knows that like, oh, you're about to do a whole bunch of effort. You're doing this thing that isn't hard. Actually, the back end tool that the piece that we were just working on, I tell my wife, I tell her every day, like it's fun because I don't know what I'm doing. So I'm happy to be learning this new skill. But I'm also not, like when compared with if I'm touching something on Android or iOS, like it's just, I'm not as, like the expertise just isn't there.
Yeah.
And so like, yeah, it gets like a little difficult. Yeah.
And so, I mean, even when you are locked into one skill like iOS, it's kind of cool too with programming because the opportunities there to learn just never end as well. Yeah. And it's like you're really big on architecture, and that's this will be like the only really technical part of this talk or this podcast. But like, if you are a programmer, like be encouraged to do that, because like be encouraged to try to learn new architectures and stuff, because that's like the plague of the app community that like everybody does things the crappy way. And like we joke about like the term like massive view controller in iOS, because like that's just what everybody does. It's that's the, and even if you don't know what that means and you're listening to this podcast, it's just one way of writing code in iOS, and everybody does it. And so like you're really big on let's learn these new ways of doing things. And you know what, I think it's cool because you're really into that because you're a game developer, I think, and you've gotten me interested in that now too, especially as I've toyed with games in the last few months. But in the game industry, that never stops. Like there is always a better way to do this thing.
Well, I mean, like new consoles are coming out with slightly different architecture. So, and you got to push, like, we need more pixels and we need better physics. And so, like, you have to eke out that performance. And so, like,
and in the consumer industry like that, like the consumers are always wanting the next best thing.
Yeah.
I think with apps, like the thing that spoils developers is that the phones are pretty powerful relative to what you're doing. So like even if you have garbage like I've seen so many projects in the past, and I look at it and I'm like, how does this thing even work? And it's just by the sheer processing power of the phone that it's able to just digest your trash code. Anyways, I just think like that's cool in programming, is that not only do you get to keep learning new skills, but you also get to improve on the skill that you think you're really good at. So anyways,
so I always talk about books. I always talk about books, so
never stops.
Never stop, because I'm always reading books. So when it comes to learning how to learn, again, I think there's two books that are kind of relevant. Two of my favorite books. They're, at least pieces are relevant. The first one is called Extreme Ownership. It's a leadership book, but and not all the principles necessarily relate to actually learning, but the core concept of extreme ownership, meaning like control everything in your world. And that was one thing I saw a lot as a teacher, and maybe in general I've seen people do this, but as a student, you need to be 100% responsible for your learning. Of course, if you're paying for a teacher, I understand, like you feel that they should be helping you more, so ask them. I would have students who wouldn't ask me. I'd sit in my office during we call it academic support, like 3 hours, 3 times a week. Sometimes I'd sit in my office and I'd be working on my own projects, but I would tell them, I'm sitting in there. If you have questions, feel free to ask me. Like I will redo lectures. No problem. And some people just won't ask. So you need to be responsible. You are responsible for changing your life. And like, if you want to learn to program, that's one way to do it. But make sure like it's not your teacher. It's not your boss. It's you it's not your parents, right? It's you who's responsible. So take that extreme ownership mentality. And in a way, I mean, neither of us read that book at that time, but that's kind of like what we're saying. I didn't like my job as a like working at the warehouse, right? It's like it's not my boss's job to fix that. So I quit, right? The other book that I really like is called So Good They Can't Ignore You. That's by Cal Newport. The quote comes from Steve Martin when people were asking him about how to be a comedian. But the general idea of that book is just focus on getting good. Like your motivation or your passion sometimes like is like a roller coaster. Sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not. But so like at certain points during your like while you're learning to program or learning whatever, it's gonna be hard. Like understand that it's gonna be hard, but just focus on how can I get really, really good. If you focus on that, if your goal is I'm gonna become really, really good, you'll get a job because somebody's gonna pay you for it.
Yeah.
Like that's it. Let's see what else. Oh yeah, and I just kind of likened that to if you are learning how to program. I had already mentioned Arnold Schwarzenegger and lifting weights, but like I also thought it's kind of like being in a band. So like if you pick up guitar and you say I want to start learning guitar right now, depending on how much you practice, 2 hours a day or 6 hours a day, you can become pretty good in a year. But still, Metallica probably isn't going to hire you to be like their guitar player.
Right.
But that doesn't mean you can't go and join a band. There's a band that will have you. You could start your own band. Like there's things that you can do after only a year or only 6 months. You could become a really good guitar player maybe better than me, let's say, in 6 months if you sit down and really work at it. But imagine if you wanted to be in a band in 6 months. It can't just be going in and playing like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star every single day for 6 months. You'd have to actually like work at it and stretch and learn new skills. So that's kind of what I think, right? You can't just go through the motions. You have to be trying to get better. And the nice thing is if you are that like 1 year guitar player, again, like Metallica isn't going to hire you, but there are jobs like Microsoft and Facebook. They have programs where they specifically hire people that are like fresh out of college or this is their first dev job. So like there's entries there for you. I had told somebody before, like if you start learning to program and you don't quit, getting the job is guaranteed. And you will move up to whatever pay you want, right? Doing basketball, I'm not telling people not to follow their dreams in basketball, or being in a band, I'm not telling you not to follow your dreams in a band, but being Michael Jordan or being Metallica is not a guarantee because everyone wants to be that. But if your goal is just to change your life, if you're working at McDonald's or if you're, I don't know, working construction or whatever, and you want to make a change, that change will happen. Right? Like it's guaranteed that will happen.
Yeah, and then like I guess it's kind of important, whatever it is that you're passionate about, whatever it is that you're working on, it's kind of important to recognize the let's say like significance of getting to the end goal, and or not the significance, that's the wrong word. The like I guess just recognizing how challenging it will be to get there. And like you said, like getting a job with programming is almost so possible that it's guaranteed that like it's gonna happen. There's a million people hiring, and like if your goal is to be the next Michael Jordan, not to be cliche, but like anything is possible if you put your mind to it. But you have to recognize the difficulty that you're gonna have getting there. And like the cool thing about programming is that like anybody can do it. Like
there's there's only one Michael Jordan. There's millions of programmer jobs or more, right? There's thousands of CEOs if you want to start your own business. There's new businesses. There's old businesses failing every day and new businesses taking over for them. So like that is all possible. It's just, again, I'm not telling anybody to like squash their dreams. You do you.
Well, yeah, and like we can't compare like being a software engineer to being Michael Jordan. Obviously, one is way more significant than the other. Yeah. But yeah, like I like the point that's trying to be made here, which is that this happens to be one of those things that's a very rewarding and fulfilling career. And if you just get after it and you just start doing it, like the end result is virtually guaranteed if you put in the work. But that's an important thing to recognize. Like any software engineer that's successful is not afraid to tell a new developer, like, get ready, buckle up. You got a long way to go, but you got to get started.
I think that's the maybe that's the outro here.
Yeah.
It's like just like we're doing with this podcast. Like you should do that. If you want to make a change, you can. So just get started.
Yep. I think that's a good place to wrap up. So thank everybody for joining us. It's been fun, and see you next week.
All right. Excellent.